Greetings, fellow Homo sapiens. I'm here with longtime friend of mine, James Robinson. He is the keyboardist for the nine-piece funk behemoth known as the Soul Motivators. James Orbison, welcome to the program.
Thank you, sir. How are you, mate?
I'm very well. It's really good to see you. It's really good to speak with you. I screwed up the intro there. I wanted to say keyboardist, and I wanted to indicate one of the founding members of the Soul Motivators. And we got there's lots of things we can talk about, but I wanted to start off talking about the Soul Motivators.
Okay.
Just because I've seen this band kind of from the beginning. I think I was at your guys' first official show back when you were a four-piece. And even that idea that, you started as a four-piece and then kind of evolved into what it is now. When I was living in Toronto, I saw that progression and it was like pretty breathtaking. Like each show, there'd be a new element. The whole thing would be tighter and tighter. It's a pretty amazing journey. Can you tell us a little bit about the Soul Motivators from your point of view?
Well, I moved to Toronto in 2006, I think it was, and I was part of a band that was a mix of klezmer, country rock, blues, the usual combo.
Really? Wow. See, I didn't know that about you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was a great introduction into the Toronto music scene, and there was really something to my first gig being at the Horseshoe Tavern, legendary Toronto venue. This was part of I think it was a Tuesday night or something, unsigned band or something like that. So I got into the live scene within a few months of moving here. It was a great experience. And the guys I was with at the time, they gave me a great introduction into the Toronto music scene. But I've always loved the funk. And I wanted to be able to do a bit more of that, go back to my first love. This was the first music I was listening to when I was a kid, and I wanted to be part of that. So good old Craigslist, I found Doug, our drummer, through there. He was looking to put together a band that, and I think he listed influences like Stevie Wonder, Herbie Hancock, The Meters, Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings, and he was looking to put together a band. From there, I met Volt, the guitarist. We had another couple of other members who were part of that at the time, and we started off, we had two guitarists, bass, drums, keys, and then we had horns coming in and out, and we had a singer called Joe, and we started this band called the Ambassadors.
Yeah, I remember seeing them at the Horseshoe.
That was I don't know whether they played the Horseshoe. We played...
No, sorry, it was Silver Dollar.
Yeah, that's it, the Silver Dollar. Yeah. Don't look for it, it's not there anymore.
I'm getting my Toronto... What, the Silver Dollar's not there anymore?
It's supposedly coming back. The developers of the building complex look set to be bringing it back in some way.
Oh, okay.
But that's to be determined, I think. Yeah, I think there's some kind of clause that requires them to keep the venue open and keep the venue running. So we were doing a residency there. For a while, we were doing once a week, and we had like the 7 p.m. slot on a Friday. And if you remember that area of Toronto, it doesn't have a lot of walk-by traffic.
Correct.
So we were often playing to an empty room or virtually empty. But it was definitely a good practice session for us. So we were throwing in all these elements. We had the jazz funk. We had Herbie Hancock in there as well. We had Manzel. We had Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings. We were doing largely covers. And I think a couple of jams as well that we put together. So this was our introduction, and we'd get a few bucks from the door. Really, not much to write home about. Maybe cab fare, a little bit of gas money, and a pound of wings. And we thought we'd made it.
Hey man, if you're getting a pound of wings out of it, then that's about as good as making it in this day and age, I reckon.
Yeah, it was. So it was a good practice. We were doing this stuff, and then the ambassadors came to the end of their run. We took a break for a little while, and then came back as a four-piece. We really wanted to focus on the instrumental stuff and really get that worked up. So we were doing once a week at the Drake. We were the house band for a comedy night called the Tuesday Night Special. That was good fun. That was a good way to get back into things and just play walk-on music for the comedy acts and intro, interval, and then the closing the show. That was a good opportunity. And that was when Volt brought in our bass player, Mark. And Mark Shapiro is a legend on the Toronto music scene. He'd been in a band for a number of years called King Sunshine, which was a live house disco band. So they were sort of running concurrently with when the Soul Motivators were getting up and running. And incidentally, it was at that point that we renamed ourselves the Soul Motivators, beginning of 2011. And he brought his talent, he brought his knowledge of the scene, he brought his knowledge of funk, and we really took off from there and were able to take advantage of some great contacts and some great situations at that time to really build the band. And then early 2012, we more or less solidified a horn section, trumpet, trombone, and sax, the holy trinity of horn sections.
Yep.
And our vocalist, Lydia, at the time, who'd come from Humber Jazz College and was a master of the jazz, folk, and soul vocal style. And it sort of took off from there. And I think really it was the fact that we were, at that time, I was just turning 30. The other guys were a few years older. And we still wanted to go out and enjoy ourselves. But we wanted to take a bit more ownership of the kind of evening that we wanted to enjoy. So
that's a good way to put it.
That was definitely it. For a lot of people, they turn 30 and they might move out the city, they might have kids, and that might restrict their ability to go out and do those kinds of things. We still had the energy for that, thankfully. And so we started putting together these nights where we'd have a DJ, we'd have an opening band, and the night was exclusively ours. And very quickly, a lot of people from Toronto, there's a great funk groove scene in Toronto. And they started showing up to our gigs. We got a lot of love from various people from the Toronto scene, and that led us to a label deal with a label called Do Right. John Kong is the label head, and he's been a DJ on the scene, he's been a promoter. He's done all kinds of things. And we knew that for him to take notice of us, we really had something special. When I think about it, there are bands similar to us, but there's no one that does that sort of retro sound in quite that same way, I don't think. I'm proud to say there's lots of Motown type bands that do the softer thing. I say softer, but more on the poppier side of things. There is more sort of pop disco type bands, but there's no one doing that blend of the Meters. I think probably the Meters and Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings were the two sort of the two foundational bands that we based our sound on.
Yeah, I would agree. Those are two very good references if people are wondering what the sound kind of in the ballpark, then those are two great references.
Yeah, and then of course I'm bringing in the Stevie Wonder, Herbie Hancock stuff, and we want grooves that are on point. I'm also keen on a good Motown style hook to the tune. I definitely sort of work and create in that kind of way. I'm thinking what would sound good on the radio, that classic under 3 minute tune with a good driving rhythm. And the Motown foundation is definitely the writing approach that I take to these songs. So we had an album out. We had an EP out in 2013. We had an album out in 2015. We got played on CBC. We got played on BBC. We got reviewed in Exclaim magazine and Now magazine. And I mean, the impressive thing for me was that this solidified in many ways my status in Canada, in that I'm glad I stuck around.
Yeah.
Because for a while I was considering moving back home, and it was a real sense of achievement.
It really is.
We kept the momentum going.
It really is a huge achievement. I mean, I was there for, like, I was there just on the periphery watching it happen as your friend, when I was living in Toronto more regularly. And just, I mean, you just described that story. When describing it, it goes by quickly, but it was really amazing to watch that whole process, and even just watching each new element being added to the band and watching it progress. Very, very, very cool. And I'm glad that it gave you a reason to stick around. Yeah,
I'm glad too. We played the Pan Am Games in 2015. Then we got a new vocalist, Shahai Taruko, who is a force to be reckoned with. She has some Betty Davis stylings in her stage approach, in her vocal style. She's got a real hard edge to her, and she can also really bring some tenderness and some social commentary to her songs as well. So that added a new dynamic, and we worked on the second album, continued to hone the songs, these new songs live. They were going down well. Got a recording done, I think, in 2017. It took us until February 2020 for the album to come out. And soon after that, we all know what happened. And here we are now, in a reflective state of mind, and reviewing our achievements, and taking a pause and wondering how we're going to carry on from here, and when everything's going to come back. So many unknowns, but a really great time to just reflect on, for me, to reflect on the last 10 years or so.
It's a lot you've accomplished.
Enjoy the good memories. Finally, it's really interesting. We recorded our album release in February this year. Live at Lee's Palace. We had a full camera setup. We had almost a full audio mix of the show, and we did a Facebook Live, YouTube Live screening of it about a month or so ago, and it was really great. Having had the time away these last few months, I was able to have some perspective on this show, have some perspective on the band. Because when you're amongst it, you're just caught up in the details, in the adrenaline with it.
Yep.
And I was able to watch this and hear this band, see this band, and go, "Hey, those guys are pretty good." And that keyboard player seems to know what he's doing.
Yeah, that's a hell of a feeling, isn't it? When you're so involved in a project, and then when it's kind of done, and you can take it in from the perspective of the listener, like all of us, and then you're like, wow, this is. I mean, especially if it's good, you're just like, wow, I can't believe those guys did that. And then it's like, wait a minute, we are those guys.
Yeah.
It's a good.
The great
Good
thing
feeling.
that's happened for me in the last few years is that I'm a lot more present on stage during the performance time. Those 90 minutes feel very calm in some ways. I mean, my head is calm and I'm in the zone in the moment. Whereas maybe 5 years ago, I was hyped up by the adrenaline surrounding the show, the promotion, the stuff we do on social media, and hit the stage and kind of feel a bit detached from everything. And in a strange way, almost anticlimactic. And then I'd get off stage and I'd be hyped up and I knew we'd had a good performance. So it's really interesting how the mindset has changed a little bit for the better.
Yeah.
Music is the music is the moment. There's all the problems of life fall away. There's no sense of, oh, I messed that bit up, I could have done better, or I hope I don't mess up. There's just going with the flow. And I think that was the intention as well. There's a feeling of being on stage. I don't want to work that hard, if you know what I mean. I want to, of course, enjoy it as much as I'm performing.
Yeah, I can relate to that from the point of music production. I mean, I have not been a performer of music in a long time, since I was probably, in my teens. But just from when you have a craft and you're working on that craft, what I found is that in the early days, like when you kind of reach a certain, whatever the couple of notches up from beginner is, between beginner and intermediate, you can get into the flow state at that beginner level. And then when you start to actually want to say, okay, I want to move towards excellence, and then you have to go through that whole intermediate phase where you're quite good, like you'll meet musicians like this, whether they're performers or whether they're recording artists, where there's a medium stage where they're very good, very competent, but you can still hear the gears turning, or watch the gears turning, or whatever the case may be. And then you keep doing it and keep doing it, and then you get to a point where you do get to a level of excellence where you're just once again one with the instrument or one with the craft that you're involved in, but now you have like just years of experience and it just flows through you. And I sometimes get there with music production. I really miss that sense of connection with when it comes to actually playing instruments. I mean, whatever instruments I have are still in a storage locker in Toronto. But I do get what you're saying. And then your whole perception towards what you do changes. And I like what you said about being present, right? Like that's the goal ultimately. Like we put in all that work and we suffer through the whole going through that phase of developing our skills and consciously turning the gears and practicing. And then eventually you just get to this point where you're humming. And I mean, whenever I've witnessed you play the keys, whether it's just in solo form when you were just at my house or on stage, I always saw that I was always just phenomenally impressed by what I've seen. I haven't seen you guys play now since I left Toronto over 5 years ago. So I'm looking forward to seeing what it's all about now when I finally get a chance to come back. I had a ticket booked, but obviously because of the pandemic situation, that's I'm still here in Bombay. Yeah. So you said a lot of interesting things, and there's like a lot of different kind of questions I want to ask you. Just 2 seconds.
Sure.
So
have you done a lot of editing so far on the podcast? Have you had to do a lot of chopping up, or have you kept it flowing quite naturally for the most part?
Oh, for these the previous ones that I've recorded. So for the most part, yeah, it is a flowing conversation, and if you've listened to it, it is most like it's not like there's like a time limit. If it goes on for 2 hours, it goes on for 2 hours. There are instances where I cut out a few things. Usually it's if the guest requests it. Like for example, I recently interviewed a journalist, And it was a great conversation, but it was a tough conversation because it was the first time that I've spoken with a journalist on this podcast. And so the topics were a bit more sensitive. And it was also her first time doing a podcast. So like there's more, it's a bit more of a serious thing, you know, like I want to make sure I send it to her, you know, and see if she wants me to cut anything out or whatever. And there's also, you know, editing these podcasts myself, I hear myself misspeak and say stupid things all the time. And that's great. You know, it's a good eye opener because, you know, like, it's good to be humbled in that way, right? Especially if we fancy ourselves to be knowledgeable or smart or intelligent or whatever. And I recently finished another podcast with a friend of mine who's not a musician, and we were just mostly talking about economics and finance, and it was a 2-hour long conversation. So there are a few, like, you know, it's just free flowing in the moment, and there were a few things I said there that were like exceptionally stupid that I needed to cut out. There's a threshold. Like I'll allow some certain level of stupidity, but then like there was like a couple of comments I made in there in the heat, like just in the flow of the conversation, that were profoundly dumb and needed to be taken out. So yeah, there is a bit of editing, but for the most part, I am trying to maintain this free flowing kind of vibe, and that's kind of why I like to make sure, if I can, if the other person has a microphone, so I can edit it to make, even though we're a world apart here, but if I can make it sound like we're in the same room, that's cool. So, you know, like we're doing this over like a Wi-Fi call. So if there's like a little bit of delay in between, like, you know, you saying something, me responding, or vice versa, I'll sometimes just remove that delay, those kind of things, you know. Yeah, there's just like some light editing involved. But enough about that.
So this is a very personal project, really. This is a very personal project for you in that it's a way for you to develop your communication, develop your listening skills.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Develop your already curious mind to people, to topics. Yeah.
Well, you know,
it's interesting. I was thinking about that.
No, you heard on my podcast with Jason, right? I mentioned the last conversation that you and I had, where like I was just like hysterical for the whole thing. And you know, like, I mean, you and I know that I talk too much, but that the thing with that was also just like the topic that I had gotten on was one that makes me hysterical, and there aren't that many topics that make me that hysterical, but the topic of that conversation really, like, I was just didn't let you get a word in edgewise. And then I also didn't really take into account that you were on a lunch break. So I was like, I felt pretty foolish by the end of that one. But definitely,
I tell you, Arnold, it was reassuringly familiar. That conversation and the tone, the feel of that conversation, because as you've said, this is an opportunity to working on your listening skills. But I was thinking I don't think we've sat down and had a proper conversation. Maybe 2.5 years. I think you were at my place maybe
longer than
a couple of years ago.
Longer than 2 years ago. It
must be longer than that.
It was
26
end of 2016. End of 2016, okay. Maybe beginning of 2017. The last time I was in Canada was the end of 2016. To record the Roundelay album, and so right. I remember some good. I think I stopped. I was in Toronto for the beginning and end of that little stint, and some really good memories from that particular visit was we got to see that Giles Peterson documentary. Bam 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 or whatever, yeah, that, which is excellent, and I recommend that to a lot of people and show people that pretty often. And then I think, on the tail end, I came back to your place because I needed you to put some organ parts down for that Roundelay album. So we had met up, we had met up then as well. But that I mean, I was not intending to, like, my plan is still, and had been at the time, to kind of eventually get to a point where I'm spending like about 6 months in Bombay, 6 months in Toronto, and so on. But I got pretty lucky in 2017, towards the end of 2017, where I wasn't expecting that I would get the chance to produce a band over here. You know, being a music producer, which is still, regardless of how much I've done it, how much I've accomplished, still feels like a really weird thing to call myself. But you're always preparing for like when your last project is going to be, because it's such a precarious thing to be doing. But I certainly wasn't expecting that I would get the chance to produce something over here. The chance came up. And I was like, well, you know, I need to do that. Like the scene over here has been so welcoming to me. I shouldn't say the scene as much as I got lucky in terms of a few people that I met that really took me in and made me feel like part of the community. And I mean, I had existed over here for 2-3 years without really collaborating or doing anything serious, just as like some guy who would just be there at shows and after parties and just be hanging out. So just the chance to produce something for this scene that is within this scene was a huge opportunity, and one more thing that I just kind of needed to do in my list of things to do. And I had no expectation that would really, no serious expectation that would lead to another project, and it did. And that project was another project that was, you know, a style of music that I hadn't really produced before, so I couldn't really say no. And I was pretty confident that was going to be my last one. And then I got another one. And here I am working on that project still. So, you know, I've been...
Well, your comfort level with the title of music producer, your comments on that are interesting. And I was just thinking about that. Musician, music producer, we're probably generationally the first or second generation for whom it's a viable thing to be a musician full-time, a viable thing to be a music producer full-time. Those opportunities are there, but there's still the elements of our elders or previous generations, the culture of those previous generations telling us that this is not a proper job. When are you going to get a proper job? I think it was the 90s. I was listening to some stuff that these things were starting to change a little bit more. But we're the recipients of those opportunities. We're the generation that has that remembers a time before the internet, before and post internet, and opportunities to do music production. Create the kind of productions at home with the right software and the right technical ability that would have ordinarily taken huge amounts of equipment, analog equipment within studios. I guess I'm saying a couple of things there, but I think we occupy an interesting place before and after the internet, that we have we have these elements of previous generations, and for whom music producer is not considered a proper job, and we're still having to prove that it is viable, it is something you can do on a full-time basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of does.
It
kind of does, even though I feel like I have a bit of a reverse take on it, in the sense that like the precarity of the position, like the means of production are so much more accessible, and that's, you know, that's what allows me to do it. And, you know, and I've been like, for example, I had to like leave all my gear, as I mentioned, in Toronto in a storage facility. Yet somehow I'm able to come to India and, you know, produce albums. And I am working out of studios. You know, I'm working out of studios and bringing those sessions to my bedroom and working on them in my bedroom. But I you know, that's a different story. That's because I have experience now, and I'm getting interesting and new good projects. But you've also leveraged opportunities to produce indie rock music,
podcasts, experimental electronica.
Yep.
You've leveraged all those opportunities that have through your networking and through your technical skill set, as well as your skill set as a musician.
Well, the skill set as a musician is atrophying. Like, but there is an element of just me wanting to do this regardless of what ridiculous situation has come at me. Like, I mean, as you know, I kind of had to move over to Bombay as just kind of because of a weird circumstance, you know, like it wasn't necessarily super planned out. And so a lot of it was just, I can't not do this at some level. And so part of it is that. And yeah, part of it is just wanting to, like the longer, I mean, you and I, when did we meet? We met at a really soul crushing type of job, in an office admin type job. It was brutal. And I have been. So
you are happy to talk about your pre-musician civilian life?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know. Are you as well? Are you willing to talk about yourself? Of course. Like, no.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm pretty. I would like to be real, and I would like to be authentic, and people should know that. Of course, I had to have any number of really, you know, weird occupations, whether it's barista or office admin, guy, whatever, you know, like we've done those things. And I mean, this is 10 years ago. We're here in 2020.
Office admin guy. Now there's a proper job.
That's a proper job. Well, you know, that's the funny thing, right? Like in sitting where we are today, we can see the banality of those types of things, and also the use, like, I mean, especially that particular job that we had. I mean, the uselessness of that job, right? Like like, I'm not talking about office jobs in general, but if you want to talk about a bullshit job, then that would be the definition of it. I mean, we were there as temps. The company itself was just brutally incompetent. Like, even if you want to look at the corporate sector and even bureaucracies within that and talk about general incompetence in that world, the company that we worked for, and I want to say worked as in past tense for both of us. This does not apply to anything we're affiliated with currently, but it was just so incompetent, and incompetent at many levels, right? Like, we were temps. There was supposed to be, it's an American company. It was an American health insurance company. So that's also an extra level of weirdness, because you're opening up an office in Canada where we have a totally different healthcare system. So you're basically guaranteeing that everybody you hire doesn't believe in what the company does, right? Like, as a default thing, pretty much everybody that works in the company doesn't believe in what the company's doing, because we have a different system, which most of us think is better. And if we didn't think it was better, then certainly working at that company really drove home the point that it is better. And then, so you have an office that's just guaranteed to be apathetic. You have the division that we were in, which was like meant to be temps just for a short time while they train up the people in Texas or wherever the hell the final office was meant to be. And they were too incompetent to do that, like, in a timely manner. So I ended up at that place for much longer than I wanted to be. I was hoping I was going to get laid off. I wanted that unemployment benefit so I could do music, like, for at least however long that benefit lasted, right? But I was trying my best to get laid off, and those bastards tried to promote me, and I was just like, no, fuck that. You know, and a mutual friend of ours, Brett, he was working above me. They were trying to promote me to his job, and I knew that job was just horrendous as well. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And this was just right around the time.
You had a great. I remember a couple of times you wearing a great beige suit with big collars on the shirt, and so. You know, yes, you had the suit, you had the formal office wear, but it was almost Arnold Goes to the Disco.
I was trying. I mean,
fantastic look.
My way of rebellion was the multicolored socks and the multicolored underwear. Like, if I wasn't allowed to be loud, you know, in my outfit, then at least with the socks, you know. But I remember I came in there with like bright orange shoes one time, and the boss was just like, "Nope, you can't wear those shoes." I was like, "Hey, they're shoes. It's not like they're sneakers. Come on, matches my tie. Get out of it." But yeah, it was That gig was really it was a huge question mark, and even like our superiors that work there, they don't work there anymore, and I'm sure they would agree that that whole place was a gong show. And it was another one of these scenarios where basically like the people above us also didn't know how to do the job. So like if we had a question about like what to do in these weird emergency scenarios that were popping up on the phone, even they didn't have the answers, which is not the case for other similar types of jobs. And I mean, ultimately, you know, to cut a long and maybe uninteresting story short, I wanted to get laid off. They wouldn't lay me off. They tried to promote me. And I was the only one on that team that was figuring things out by the end of it. Like, it was such a confusing job, and I had learned the weird labyrinth of procedures you had to go through to actually help the clients, because they had designed the system in such a way as to fuck people over, basically. You know, Americans, at the end of the day, calling in about health insurance claims. And the system was kind of built to fuck them over. And I quit that job assuming that I would just get like a better admin job, you know? Like I was like, okay, like I want a day job, but my day job shouldn't be this horrible. Like the type of abuse we had to deal with on the phone was awful. And that type of abuse, if you're subjected to it constantly, it's really bad for your mind, and then you start to feel it in your body. It's just horrible. So I assumed I would just find another admin job, but this is like, you know, 10 years ago, 2010. So this is immediately post financial crash. And so there's like no hope of finding an admin job. I just couldn't do it. And that is kind of what solidified my music production thing, right? Like I was always planning to pursue music production, but the fact that I was like waking up in the morning, sending out this same shitty cover letter that you have to like personalize for each application, but all of the jobs are entry-level jobs that say they require 5 years of experience. I mean, that was such a wacky time. Like, I'm pretty sure the job market, you know, at least pre-COVID, was better in Toronto than it was at that time, which was like, even for like an entry-level admin job, people were going through like 3-4 interviews just to get these jobs, and they were demanding like outlandish levels of experience. And so I just couldn't find a job for the life of me. Like I went for months. Well, yeah, I went for months just sending out these applications and really banal cover letters, you know, like I'm a great leader, but I'm also a good team, this type of bullshit that you just keep regurgitating. And I wasn't even getting callbacks, forget about an interview.
Oh yeah.
But then in the, you know, when you do your daily resume sending out CVs, you know, after that, what are you doing? You got music to make, people are coming over every day, and you're recording tunes. And eventually people ask you, like, you go out to an event or a party, and it's like, hey, what do you do? And you can say I'm out of work, or you can say I'm a music producer. And calling myself a music producer started to make more sense, because this is literally what I'm doing every day. And in fact, here are all these completed tracks that I'm creating like on a pretty regular basis. And so that's your resume, man. Well, that's what now that is my resume. But at that time, it was sort of like I just had no choice, you know, like after you apply for all the jobs that are available in that day, you're making tunes. And so you have no choice but to say, okay, I'm a music producer. But then in the early days, when you haven't really released anything, you know, notable, then it's like, it's embarrassing, right? Like you go to a social event, people are like, what do you do? And you say music producer, and it feels weird just to utter that, like, you know, in any kind, like now I can say that that's what I do, and I can back it up with like a list, right? But that was a really weird, a weird time to say that. And then you go through all the imposter syndrome, and then for a time it made sense. It made more sense, like socially, to say I was unemployed than to say I was a music producer, right? Like I went through a phase where I would say I was a producer, and then I went through a phase where if people asked, I would just say, yeah, I'm unemployed, or something like that, because that somehow felt less embarrassing than saying I'm a musician or a music producer. So that was it. Yeah, like the financial crash and my inability to find even a day job, that really made me have to lean in and dig in to the music production thing and take it seriously. And the thing I mean, the reason I moved to Toronto was to do that. So like, you know, every day of your existence, if you get up and you see the CN Tower and you're like, why am I here? Why did I move to this city? I moved to this city to pursue music. So like, that was my motivation. And you know, you witnessed this, right? Like so many failed projects, so many half-assed tracks, so many garbage ideas, and you cycle through it and through it and through it until eventually you finally release, you know, your first full-length album, your first few projects that you can actually say, hey, like, look, I can do this thing. Like, I can do it properly. And then, you know, fast forward and here I am, right?
I mean, it's interesting because if you think about it, you were building, you know, I guess we were in our own respective ways, building our skill set by just doing stuff. Doing little recordings, messing around with bits of melody and stuff like that, and that mindset of being intentional is so important to it.
You have to tinker.
You have to tinker. You have to just keep
doing
stuff.
Tinkering is very important. Yeah.
Yeah. I was reading the Bruce Springsteen autobiography a little while back, and he said something interesting. He said, you don't have to be Mozart, you don't have to be a musical genius, but whatever you play, whatever you do as a musician, do it with intention. And that really stuck with me. And that took away some of the imposter syndrome. I mean, I've always thought, because I've never had any jazz training. I had some classical training in the early days as a young kid, but I was taught to play some Little Richard, I think it was, by one of my piano teachers, the stride left hand stuff. And from there, that built on it. And it's largely self-taught and playing by ear. And I think for a long time, I felt I don't have the jazz training. I don't have the theory. So I'm not a proper musician. There were parts of me that felt embarrassed being around quote unquote trained musicians, particularly from the jazz college here. And reading that from the Springsteen biography, I thought, okay, no, when I do commit myself to something, it's with intention. And that's the most important thing. Giving all I've got to the performance in the moment or the creation of the music in the moment. So that did away with a lot of the imposter syndrome feeling for me, and I'm glad I read that, and that sticks with me.
Springsteen is amazing. His keynote, I think at South by Southwest, is also a really great one. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of Springsteen. What a songwriter! And Bruce Springsteen also is one of these guys where, like, people who have tried to imitate him have. Even the people who have tried to imitate him and have been successful, it's just not the same. Like, you know, it's just like when other people try to do it, it's just kind of cheesy at best. It's just a little bit cheesy, and at worst, it's quite. But Bruce Springsteen, man, like the authenticity that he brings to his songwriting and that's it right there, right? Like, why is it that when Bruce Springsteen does what he does, it feels so authentic and real? And then that ties into what you're saying, right, about intention. You
know, I'm not a huge fan of Springsteen's music.
I remember
really got into it in a big way.
I remember very early in our friendship that we had this conversation, because I got into Bruce Springsteen. I mean, it's not the type of music that I mean, I listen to lots of different kinds of music, but I think if people kind of just met me and knew me a little bit superficially, they would probably be surprised that I'm a fan of Bruce Springsteen. But I've just always been amazed by his visceral authenticity in his songwriting. And I could recommend a lot of songs for you to take in if you want to kind of experience that. But that's, you know, that conversation can happen later. For me, the imposter syndrome kind of, it went away kind of maybe from the opposite end. Like, for me, especially after moving to India, really, because in India, I'm around way more musicians. Like, almost all of my friends are in the music scene or related scenes, you know, whether it's arts or filmmaking. And am constantly meeting people that are so face-meltingly good at what they do. And I mean, you know that I used to call myself a multi-instrumentalist. I have a basic knowledge of how to play a lot of different instruments, and I still call myself a composer and a beat maker and a mix engineer. Like I have all these different titles, subtitles under a music producer, right? But if you do all these things, you know, like I can take some pride in that I can do a lot of different things, maybe even a little bit more than your average music producer. I can go in a lot of different directions, but I'm constantly confronted with people that are just so much better than me at specific, like any one of these individual things. I'm just constantly confronted with people that are so much better than me. And so the only option you have there, the only two options you have, is you either get demotivated and stop, or you just accept that, like, man, like, you ain't shit, just have fun. And so like the way that I kind of work through the imposter syndrome is that I just accept that I'm just some random idiot, and that like I just show up and try to find joy in what I'm doing, right? Like any specific thing, whether it's beat making, like I know so many beat makers that make better beats than I do. I know so many bass players that play bass better than I do. I know so many guitarists that are better than me at guitar. You and a few other people that I've met just destroy me when it comes to keys, right? Like I know mix engineers that are better. Like each specific thing, I just know there's so many people that are much better. And so when confronted with this reality that there's no way I'm going to just be phenomenal at every single one of these things, then it's just like, well, let me just imbibe the joy of doing it, you know? And that's kind of what gets me through it.
Well, there's always going to be someone who's better than you, and you're always going to perceive it that way, and that's healthy, isn't it? Because that pushes you to improve, or at the very least defer to them for their expertise, and to be able to just bask in their musicianship.
Yeah, well, that's an important point, right? Like I just like when you meet somebody that's like kind of in your territory and they're doing it better than you do, you have the option of just getting really upset about it, or you can be really inspired by it. And I mean, I kind of was lucky in that I went through my really insecure, arrogant phase when I was very young, like, you know, long before I met you. And I learned the value of just being inspired by people, even my contemporaries or friends, or just people I would meet. And so I try to keep that sense of awe, you know, when I watch somebody do what they do, especially when you watch somebody do something that they're just really good at. That is an amazing thing to watch. And so if you open yourself up to that, then you can actually become inspired. You can learn a lot, and that can push you, you know, that can push you further.
I saw a James Brown documentary a couple of years back, and for the first time, really, they'd interviewed in depth some of his band members, because, as you know, he had a huge number of bandmates during the years. And I think they were interviewing Pee Wee Ellis and Fred Wesley, and those guys were trained jazz musicians, and both of them said that they were going to be in James Brown's band for a little bit. They said, well, we'll do this for a bit. This is going to be our leg up. This is going to get us, we'll be able to save some money. We'll be able to get into the jazz scene and start our jazz career. And they talked about working with James Brown, great dancer, great frontman, great facilitator in many ways. I don't think he was much of a musician in the technical sense. He had the feel. I mean, God knows he had the feel, right? He was able to get the drummers. He described what he wanted in very crude terms, and was such a force of personality for both better and worse, that he got what he wanted from those musicians. And I mean, ultimately, it's about the James Brown show, and I think there was some mixed feelings from some of those musicians when they stopped working with him, that they perhaps deserve more credit than they got for coming up with these classic breaks and these classic sounds. But a real insight into James Brown's limitation was quite a moment for me.
Yeah, actually, it's the first time I'm thinking about that now that you bringing it up. But it's kind of true, right? Like, who is James Brown, and like if you kind of gave that guy a guitar or whatever, like what would he do with it? But then you put him in that scenario, and he's able to command and bring together this whole band, and so that says something about you know, like what you were saying about like maybe feeling a little bit embarrassed about not knowing the music theory, being around trained musicians. And then you watch a guy like James Brown, who's, seems to not really care. And then on the other hand, the flip side of that is actually the brilliance of those musicians, right? Like we don't often think, right? It's like that funky drummer Loop, that was his drummer. And, so who do you attribute that infectious groove to? Do you attribute it to James Brown, or do you attribute it to the drummer whose name, unfortunately, I can't even conjure up?
Clyde Stubblefield.
There you go. Let that be known, right? Like such an important groove in the history of grooves.
Did we go and see him?
Did
one of our free music shows that we went to see? I'm thinking
I don't believe so.
Square, Clyde Stubblefield, and Chuck D.
No, that's not one that we went to see. But this is a good time to let everybody know that James is a guy that when I moved to Toronto, he really took ownership of me in the sense that, like, I mean, Toronto is overwhelming in terms of the opportunity to see like world-class anything in any week, right? Like any given week, there's going to be some world-class multiple world-class amazing shows happening, some of which are for free. And I'm a guy coming from Newfoundland, and I'm assuming in the back of my mind, I'm going to move to Toronto, but there's going to be great shows all the time. I'm going to see all my favorite acts. And then you arrive there, and it's just overwhelming. Like there's just so much to take in, and so many cool shows happening all the time that you're overwhelmed and you just don't do it. And I mean, so much of my time, pretty much my entire time in Toronto, I was kind of in my house just trying to hone my skills, and I would really neglect to just take a peek in Now Magazine to see what was going on. And you were the guy that was like, I mean, you really went above and beyond, and it's the reason why I consider us to be so close, because during times when I was quite isolated, you would just be like, look, this show is happening for free at Yonge and Dundas Square. Come on, like you're coming with me. Like such and such is happening. You got to come check this out. Like this is before any Soul Motivators shows was happening, right? Like you were there, letting me know what was happening, and because of you, I've gotten to see some great acts because of you, often for free. Like just a few off the top of my head that I saw, pretty much because you got me to go. Fela Kuti. Is it Femi Kuti? Femi Kuti is his son. Which one is the son? Which one's the Femi is the son? Right?
Was it Sean Kuti? No,
what?
The other one.
I don't know.
His other son.
It was one of the
Kuti sons.
One of the sons, and that was at the Harbourfront, I believe. I believe we saw the Roots. I've seen the Roots a few times, and I think the first time I saw them was, again, thanks to you. That was at what do they call Nathan Phillips Square? I'm hopefully remembering my Toronto localities.
Yeah, the Jazz Fest.
And that's just a few. There are others. I mean, that's not even touching on Yonge and Dundas. The free shows that we saw at Yonge and Dundas, which I assume still happen. Maybe this year is a little different, but generally I would assume that they still happen. Manifesto, we saw some good shows at the Far Side. I think, was I with you for the Far Side?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and who else? Talib Kweli. I think we saw him.
I didn't see Talib Kweli. I would have remembered because Talib Kweli is a big early influence on me, despite maybe some of the weird stuff he's going through currently. But yeah, just lots of shows, and
that was a reminder for me that Toronto is a great city, and I think for a long time it felt as if it was living in the shadow of New York or Chicago or maybe even Montreal in some cases. But it's a reminder that for a few months every year, when it gets warmer, there are all manner of shows that you can go and see, all manner of free things that you can participate in. And then, of course, the scene, which I'm proud to be a part of, there is such great groove-based musicians, electronica stuff, jazz. I'm not so much up on the rock and roll in this city and the folk and stuff like that, but there are the kinds of musicians that would rival musicians from any of those cities, and you just have to dig a little deeper to find them in some cases, and that makes it a little bit more special.
Toronto is full of talent, and you know what's interesting is, I mean, both you and I are people that moved to Toronto from elsewhere. The people that seem to be the most down on the city and seem to kind of brush off all of the exciting things you can do there are the people that are born there and have grown up there their whole lives. I would always be amazed, you know, as a Newfoundlander in Toronto, just kind of like, wow, there's so much to do, and let's go here. And you know, when you move to a city, then you learn it in a different way than when you're born and raised in a city. Like, my knowledge of St. John's is quite different than my knowledge of Toronto, Edinburgh, or Bombay, because the cities that I moved to and actively had to learn on my own, you learn it in a very different way. And what I've found when I speak with my friends who are born and raised in Toronto, like, my knowledge, like, I know things about Toronto that they don't. And they, of course, know lots of things about Toronto that I don't. But it's like there's this weird sort of a Venn diagram kind of scenario where, like, there's this overlap in knowledge. But those of us that kind of come to Toronto and have to go through the process of learning where things are and what's going on and what's happening, we get this insight into the scene and shows that people that are from there often kind of neglect. And it was often that I would, you know, have to convince my Toronto native friends to just be like, there's this amazing show going on, like, and they're like, what? Where is this? I'm like, you don't know about this place? Come on, like, you know, like, that was a pretty frequent thing. But yeah, but Toronto also really came into its own in the music scene, right, in the 2000s, and you're right that for a time even it was living in the shadow of Montreal, right there, because there was a time in Canadian history when Montreal was just a bigger city than Toronto. Like, that's a line I remember from my walking tour, when I would walk through the downtown core of Toronto, right? Toronto's the biggest city in Canada now, but that wasn't always the case. It used to be Montreal. And the downtown of Montreal still feels denser, like a more gritty, dense city, right?
Yeah, and well, we went there, didn't we, for the Osheaga?
That was another
2013, I think it was.
Another example of James basically saying, "Listen, buddy, you're coming with me to this music festival. Here's a wristband, and like, get in the car." And God bless you for that.
I think we saw Beck.
Beck was amazing. That was one of my favorite live shows. We saw Charles Bradley. Is it Charles Bradley?
Yes.
We saw a lot of great acts, but those are two standouts from Osheaga. Bonobo, we saw at the do a great set. Yeah. We saw Disclosure. We saw Disclosure before I knew what the hell Disclosure was. Did we? Yeah, man.
My God, my memory is starting to go a little bit. I think it's reflective of what a chaotic time that was. Those few years there. Disclosure. Okay, I don't remember it. I'm not saying it didn't happen.
You introduced me to Disclosure, and I believe, I mean, they're one of your you're a pretty big-ish fan. I feel like that's a weird wording. You're a fan of Disclosure, right?
I'm a big fan of them, and I don't. I would have remembered going to see them. I don't know whether we did.
This is great. I love it.
My God, isn't that terrible?
No, it's all right. I mean, but like, to be fair, that, like, Disclosure, it's electronic music, it's danceable, and electronic shows, I gotta be honest with you, I still haven't I don't think the art of performing electronic music has really been honed in a way that is satisfactory to me. Like most times when there's an electronic act that I really like, most of the time I would just prefer to watch them do a DJ set.
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of times it's really weird. Like, you know, how much of this is a backing track? Why are you hitting those pads with drumsticks? And like, there's a MIDI, like, what are you doing? How much of it are you triggering? It's weird to me. And it's like, you know, if the effect for the listener is just kind of like, I'm just listening to electronic music on a big system. Like just get behind some decks and just play me some tunes. I don't care if they're yours or if they're your selection. That's usually how I feel about electronic music, even though electronic music is my favorite thing, right? Like, I guess it is. You know, that's what I like to make, and it's probably the reason why I don't really perform as an electronic music. Like, I haven't figured out a way to perform electronic music in a way that's fun and engaging for me, and I think that reflects in you know, like the audience can pick up on that, and that's why, you know, like I'd rather just see a DJ set. So the Disclosure show, I remember it pretty clearly, and you were definitely there with me, like. You know, you were right beside me.
That's Osheaga, right? That was one of the Osheaga nights.
Yep, it was Osheaga, and
okay.
I remember the visuals pretty clearly because they had this like sort of line drawing of a face that kept kind of like redrawing itself.
Okay,
that was what the visuals were, and I distinctly remember it. I think it's two of them, right? And I just distinctly remember one of them with drumsticks, and he was kind of like he had a drum pad, kind of like, you know, SPDX or whatever they call them, and it didn't really sink into me. Like, it didn't sink in for me. Like, it didn't sink in what I was seeing, and this kind of is a testament to what I'm saying. Like, I became a fan of Disclosure, like somewhat like a significant span of time after the fact, right? Like, we went to Osheaga, we saw this happen in front of our eyes. We both probably forgot it, and then like about a year and a half later, I heard.
That's very kind of you. I've certainly forgotten.
Well, no, it was kind of forgettable.
You have a clear memory of it.
I have a clear memory of it, but it was retroactive to the extent that like it was a forgettable show when I was watching it, when we were watching it. But it was about a year and a half later when like Disclosure in, you know, like their music just kind of entered my life somehow. I can't even remember how. And then like it slowly started to piece together like, oh, this is that same group that we saw at Osheaga. Oh, shit. And it was only then that I made the connection. And I think, yeah, it could be a similar thing for you, right? Like, I got into Disclosure as a fan a solid at least year after we saw that happen. And yeah, it was only and the only reason I even remember the show is two distinct things. Is that graphic, the visual in the back of this sort of like line drawing face that kept redrawing itself, and one of those kids had
this now.
Yeah, one of those kids had drumsticks, and I was like, it's again. And so here's some more Osheaga stuff for you. So this goes deep into my critique of like.
Remind me.
Well, yeah, there we go. Two old timers now. I'm talking about Lollapalooza or fucking Woodstock or whatever it is. No, so this goes deep into my critique of like how do you perform certain styles of music, like because. You know, back in the day, like in the early days of recording, you were composing your music in a garage or elsewhere, and then you would go into the studio, and the job of the producer or recording engineer was to just capture this sound of a band that, you know, presumably the songs have been arranged and recorded and composed, you know, beforehand. But then you enter it, you fast forward past things like Pink Floyd and stuff, in this huge gray area of like composing songs in your garage and then composing them in the studio, you know, right? Like you're in the studio, eating up studio time, messing around with different post-production techniques. And finally, you know, when you're in the era of hip hop and electronic music and those kind of things, we get into a scenario where like music is composed in the studio and then you got to figure out how to perform it after the fact, right? Like there was a time when performing it was where it started, right? Like you didn't have to worry about how you were going to perform. Like Led Zeppelin didn't have to worry about how they were going to perform their songs after they put out the record. They fucking knew how to perform their songs because they wrote them, you know what I mean? Like, and then it was the job of the record producer to make that work in the context of a recording. Whereas like now, there's lots of music out there that gets composed and written and arranged in the studio, and then you have to go out into the real world and you're like, wait a minute, how do we perform this? And so you see that. It ties in with my critique of like why, you know, I still am often unimpressed with electronic acts live. But there was another act that we saw in at Oshega, which is again one of my favorite MCs. But it's just always a mystery. Now it was Big Boy. We saw Big Boy, and he was in a cast. I believe he had broken his leg or something, and they brought him out in a throne, and he was sitting in this throne, and he was killing it. Big Boy, obviously, he's awesome. He was killing it, right? But Big Boy and even Outkast. Now, later on, when Outkast did a reunion, they had a big full band, and it was awesome. But for a long time, in the early days, not the early days, but the medium days, middle days of Outkast, when, you know, around Stankonia at that time, they had the weirdest live setup, which was DJ, turntablist, DJ/turntablist, drummer, guitarist, and then backup singers. And like, this to me just fries my brain. I'm like, why would you choose this combination of things for your live performance? Like, I would just rather you go up there with a DJ. Like, what? Why is the drummer playing along to drums that are already existing in this backing track? Like, this is pointless. Right. Why is there a guitar player, but the bass is coming through the backing track? Like, that never made sense to me. Like, for me as a producer, I really need to have a sense of cohesion, right? In terms of the instruments you select. And it always seemed really random and haphazard that Outkast and even that incarnation of the Big Boy sort of touring band. And I guess like, you know, there's probably financial limitations and stuff, like you can't exactly tour with a huge band and all that stuff. I'm sure those things factor into it. But it was always really weird for me was
it a good performance? Was it, I mean, have you seen any footage of this and what?
It was a good performance.
Was like live?
It was a good performance because Big Boy is awesome, right? Like, but just sonically, right. like imagine being the sound guy for that. Like, okay, so there's a DJ and then there's a drummer and then there's a guitar player and then there's these two backup singers and an MC. Like, what? Like, you know, come on. Like, that's just a mess. Like, it's the weirdest thing, you know, like that bugs me. Like, those things don't fit together sonically in a way that makes sense, and it would just be better if it was a DJ and an MC. Like, just get out of it, you know? And it was awesome because Big Boy's awesome. But like, you can look up clips of Outkast on SNL, and it's the same weird thing. It's like, why this doesn't make any sense? And so you see this struggle of like, okay, we composed this music in the studio, and now we have to figure out how to perform it. The figuring out how to perform it comes after the fact, which is a modern phenomenon, right? And I think this is something that I always try to keep in mind when I'm producing, right? Like, the recording arts, like you're a recording artist, you're making a record, that's distinctly different from a live performance. And there are times when the two can kind of coincide. Like for example, and this actually brings me around to something I wanted to ask you anyway. With the Soul Motivators. The Soul Motivators, okay, so you guys have this throwback sound that goes back to a time when actually, yeah, like, of course you know how to perform the damn tunes, right? Like, you're not waiting till you get into the studio to write these tunes. You're writing them, you're performing them, you're trying them out. It's great. So like, then when you come into the studio, you're trying to figure out how we're going to capture this energy and translate it, because so much about what this so much of what the Soul Motivators is about that live energy. And now here's a recording environment. It has the potential to be very sterile if you don't do it right. And this ties in nicely because like the approach that you have always been insistent on with regards to your recordings, if I'm not mistaken, is like, listen, live off the floor, and, you know, limited overdubs. If we have to do them, it shouldn't be too many. And if I'm also not mistaken, Do Right Records has also given you the opportunity to sort of record this music in a way that's true to sort of the era that it's supposed to invoke. Am I right about that?
We did on that point. We did a couple of EPs for a small Detroit-based label called Funk Night Records, and we recorded those off the floor. In our rehearsal space, we had a producer called Josh Cavan, who just showed up with a backpack, some good mics, a mixing desk, and I think he mic'd the drums. He placed one mic under the snare slightly back a bit that captured the hi-hat as well. And I think he might have had one overhead and one bass drum mic.
Yeah,
but it was a real basic setup.
Yeah, that's the old school kind of way of doing it. And especially if you got to record live off the floor and you need to conserve microphones and inputs, then yeah, that's a common thing. And even in today's VSTs, like if I have like a VST software that sort of is supposed to emulate sort of old drums, like vintage style drums, those are the mic options that you get within the virtual instrument, right? It's like one overhead, maybe it's mono,
yeah,
you know, like the mic placed awkwardly, kind of,
it was in terms of the immediacy, that was probably the best experience. We just did some of the old breaks that we do, some of the dusty old deep funk stuff. We just did some covers of that, and I think we did 4 songs in the end, including one original. So it was all instrumental, all 4-piece. Yeah. I think we recorded them in a couple of afternoons, and then they were taken and they were sort of very mildly mastered, if that's the right phrase. But they were prepped for 45s. And I think from there you listen to the MP3 of that, and it sounds raw. It sounds beat up, and it sounds immediate because we didn't take unnecessary amounts of time overlaying or trying different things. I think you
capture that energy.
Yeah, I think we did a bit more of that in the studio when we recorded the album. There were some additional overdubs for vocals and maybe some additional keyboard parts. Instrumentation-wise, in the studio, we captured things fairly immediately. We didn't do too many overdubs. We captured that live sound. There were some overdubs for vocals, which was fine because Shahai is such a great vocalist.
Are you talking about your more recent recordings now, or are you still talking about those early EPs?
The most recent album.
So you're still sticking to that. You're still sticking to that kind of process, right?
I know for me, I'm certainly trying to push that. I think my keyboard parts, I do perhaps 2 or 3 takes of each tune, and then leaving in a couple of mistakes if necessary. If the overall take was good, I'm not going back in and punching in too much additional stuff where I've made errors. I'm happy with that. There's a UK musician in the 70s and 80s called Chaz Hodges, and he said 3 takes for a live band feel is the one. 3 takes, because any more than that, you either don't know the tune or the tune's no good. Yeah. Yeah. You also lose that. You lose that immediacy, and you lose that intention, right? Like the more times you sort of hammer it out, the more, like fuck, like you want to capture that joy as well. And so like the more times you repeat it, and I mean, I can tell you this even just from working on the types of records I do. If I'm working with a singer especially, but any type of instrumentalist, if you have to like hammer out the parts too many times, they start to lose the feel of it, right? And it starts to become more clinical, and not just on their end, but in particular, if they don't know the tune and it's like lots and lots of takes, then it gets clinical on my end in terms of editing and stuff like that. And that's not always the case, but yeah, there is a point, even when we're doing a record like track by track, right? Like part by part, there reaches a point where, okay, like this is too many takes. We're not going to get it today. We need to rest. We need to, take a break. Maybe we need to smoke a J or something, or come back tomorrow and we'll try it again, because we're losing the feel. Now we're kind of in that beating a dead horse territory, if that makes sense. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, I know that. Maybe the horse will be alive again tomorrow. Maybe but Quincy Jones described it as the paralysis of analysis.
Oh, that's
right?
a great one.
And
That's a great one. I had a friend of mine in a previous podcast who used that same expression, but in the context of spirituality or something. And it's just interesting that you mentioned that. And I didn't know that was Quincy Jones. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I think, yeah, you risk the stagnant feeling setting in if you're beating that dead horse. Then you start to question, oh, is this any good at all? Is this a complete load of rubbish? Have we got to start again? That's always the risk. So 2 or 3 takes for me, ideally. Now, of course, I'm working with a group of musicians, and we have a fairly democratic process in the way we do everything. So I have to make compromises, but there are, for me, ideally, let's get it down as quickly as possible. 1 to warm up, 1 good one, hopefully, and then 1 that might be slightly better. And those are your 3 takes done.
Are you so like for the newer stuff? Is it still it's the newer stuff is not live off the floor? It's sort of instrument by instrument.
How is it different? I think instrumentation wise, it's pretty much live off the floor. Minimal overdubs for keyboard solos, guitar solos, something like that, and then we added the horns on afterwards. And then I think the vocals were done somewhere between the horns being completed in the previous and after we'd done the main 4-piece of the group. As I say, that took a little bit more time because Shahai was honing those backing vocals, which really gave the I don't want to say pop element, but certainly radio friendly element, right? The sing along chorus bits, the Motown style.
Yep.
And that was completely necessary, I think, to have the reception as we have done for listeners of BBC, Radio 6, Radio 2 or CBC, that drive time slot or that breakfast time slot, you need the sing-along choruses. And so probably then replicating those songs live, that's where we lose a little something, if anything. It's in the backing vocals, because it's me and Mark and Derek trying to do the best we can with what we've got vocal-wise.
Yeah, if it was me, I would in the studio. If it was me and I was in charge, I would get you guys to do the backup vocals. You know, like whoever composes it, that's fine. But I mean, I like I kind of like to go all in.
I'm glad we did not do the backing vocals because we can hit some notes some of the time. But to say that we can sing, I don't know. I know Derek has had some formal choir training and he can do a bit better than me and Mark, but we are not singers. We certainly have enthusiasm for that particular task, but it's just as well that our documented recording is Shahai doing all those vocals and our recordings on the radio with that.
I understand what you mean, but I just generally like obviously not in every single situation. The record I'm working on now, like all the backup vocals are being done by the artist, you know, because it's a solo project and her voice is front and center, even when it's backup vocals. But I really do like having different voices, like the texture of different voices, and it goes back to making it sound more like a sort of a real event that's happening. And so, like, I mean, especially if I was involved in a project where it's like, hey, we're going for this live off the floor feel, then I would be like, well, listen, you know, let's get different voices in there just for the texture. But you know, you wouldn't necessarily do that every single time. But it's a thing I like to do, and I mean, I even do this with guitars and stuff. Like, if I'm working with a band and they want to do guitar overdubs, I kind of insist that they like use a different guitar and play through a different amp. You know what I mean? It's like if you want to add a second guitar part, I want a distinct guitar tone and sound from the other, you know, the other guitar that's already on there. When I had to produce the Cognac Net, that's a band that has 3 guitar players. Like that's just their normal situation, is that they have 3 guitar players. And when they perform, I mean, I'd watched them play live a few times before I ever got the chance to produce their record. But I remember one of the first times I saw them play live, you know, if I'm not mistaken, it seemed like two of them were using the same kind of guitar, and the other guy was using like not way different, and even playing through similar kind of amps. And then, you know, other shows they've mixed it up. It had changed. But when it got around to like making the record, I was like pretty insistent that we get like a different amplifier for each guitar player, like a different type of amplifier, and a different, like they were not allowed to play through the same type of guitar. You know, like I'm not allowing two Telecasters, two Stratocasters to any of the same guitar, and it's just, you know, just to create that feel of a live band rather than somebody in a bedroom layering up guitars, you know, by himself, or somebody layering up vocals in their room by themselves. Yeah.
And was that something that you facilitated as a producer and ultimately enabled them to think about their recording and their live performance differently?
So I don't know how it's affected their live performance, although I do think they now all use different guitars. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they do. The amplifier situation is random because sometimes it just depends on what is available at what venue or what you have access to. Like if it's a big show, then maybe you can get your own different types of amps in there. Maybe it's a different type like that. That's not fully for me to like. I wouldn't know the answer to that, and it probably depends on the different circumstances depending on the show and the venue and that kind of thing. But I did manage to convince them to, I believe I convinced them to stop using backing tracks because they're an indie rock band. And I remember a whole bunch of times that I saw them play, they had backing tracks, but for stuff that just made no sense. Like again, backing tracks, I'm not against them, but like you have to have a good reason to come with backing tracks. And if it's not a good reason, then just get rid of it. Like it's really pointless. And especially if you're a rock band, and you want to capture that energy. Like if you decide to go with backing tracks, then that basically immediately means that the drummer has to be listening to a click track on his headphones. And in a lot of cases, that means that everyone's listening to a click track. And this just alienates you from the music. Like, why do click tracks exist? Click tracks exist initially because you're going into the studio or you're recording instruments separately. So you want to like have some sense of the beat so that everyone can record. Whatever, it's for that. That was originally the process. It's really weird when you get into a live scenario because in a live scenario, I want to see chemistry occurring between the people on stage. And if everybody's listening to a click track, then they're by definition not listening to each other.
Yeah.
And so you better have a really good reason for having a click track, playing along to a click track live. You know what I mean? Like there better be some really cool, like those backing tracks better be really cool and innovative and really mean something for you to justify having having them in the first place and forcing everybody to use a click track instead of like looking at each other and having communication. Like that's a big deal. And you can see that, you can feel it, right? And like I would just harp on about this like a lot throughout the production process because there was one point, there's one song on the record that has this like elaborate clapping rhythm, and we hadn't released the record yet, but they wanted a bounce of the clapping thing so that they could play it, in the track, and I was just like, wow, man, just think about this from the audience's point of view, like. The audience can hear clapping, but they don't see anybody else on stage clapping. Nobody on stage is doing the clapping. And also you have like a backup singer that could be clapping, but like she's not doing it. Like this is really weird. And like you're putting yourself through this hellish thing of like listening to a click track just to get this thing in. And there's like so many other ways you could realize this clapping. Like you could also reinvent the thing for the live performance. Like, okay, so you don't have a big group of people clapping. Like you use your creativity. Like maybe like you can give the backup singer a tambourine or a woodblock, or use, like there's lots of different things you can do. Like maybe not those specific things, right? So I was harping on about that all the time. Like I was a bit of a jerk about it. throughout the process. I would kind of make fun of them a bit for doing it. And then, again, this was still, the album hadn't come out yet, and they were playing a show near my place, and I went to see them, and I could just tell, like the day they stopped using the click track, I could just tell. It was so much better. The energy was so much more on point. The chemistry was there. And I didn't need them to tell me. Like after they finished the show, I was like, you guys didn't use a click track, did you? And they're like, no. I was like, that sounded amazing. Like they were glued together. It was like they were a single unit. And yeah, like I'm always amazed by that. And I'm always like, because I have such a background in electronic music, you know that that's kind of where I started with electronic and hip hop. So when somebody gives me a live band to produce, or if it's just a more organic style of music, my main thing that I'm going to go for is to make this sound as organic as possible. Like, you know, and so that's just my philosophy. Now, there are some bands that really benefit from having backing tracks and interesting kind of samples and things that occur in the midst of their performance. And so if it's a really innovative thing, if it's an innovative use of samples, then I'm willing to say, okay, like I'm not such a absolutist that I'll say like, you should never do this, but it's like, really think about what you're getting when you decide to use a click track, and think about it from the audience's point of view. Like, what is the experience of sitting in the audience and hearing a bunch of sounds that are clearly not coming from anybody on stage? There's another, I'll go on another little mini rant in relation to that. There are some sort of progressive metal bands I've seen where like on the record they have these like really lush ambient intros with synths and different layers and stuff. And you know, like I've seen guys, you know, bring out a laptop, you know, on this and have it on the side of the stage just so that these ambient intros for the songs can play through, you know, their laptop before they, you know, the song starts. And I'm just like, man, you guys are amazing musicians. I know for a fact that at least a few of you have gone to like music school and shit. You're telling me that you cannot reimagine that ambient intro with your live instruments? Like, fuck off. Like, it's so pointless.
Right.
And you have this like ethereal soundscape, and it's like a live venue. It's not like I'm sitting in my bedroom with my headphones on. It's not the same experience. It's not the same thing. So like, take that weird ambient thing that you're triggering from your laptop and reimagine that shit and figure it out for your scene. There are people that disagree with me pretty hard on this, but it's just like, I always would rather just see the band perform raw than have all these extra bells and whistles. Like, it's just like, it's really masturbatory
every time.
And yeah, it's you know, that's, you know, that rant over, but there you go.
I hear you on that. I think my patience is as such that I wouldn't spend too much time messing around with trying to get ambient noises or clap tracks right for a live performance. I mean, I was just thinking while you were talking there, it's most of my preference for seeing music in a live setting is perhaps associated with sort of shaking out the week, everything you do on a sort of Friday and Saturday night to take yourself somewhere else, to take yourself to another place is based on the immediacy.
Yep.
Because I mean, I work a regular job, and you know, so I'm not a musician all the time. So there's a certain sense of the weekend being a short period of time for me. So I want to get out, maybe have a couple of drinks, dance. Now, whether I should dance is another question entirely. But all the shows I've gone to see for the most part are ones that are groove based, or if they're rock music, then they're sort of fast paced rock and roll. I want something that gives me that energy. And so I know also in the studio when we've been experimenting with different soundscapes, my patience tends to run out and just say, come on, where's the feel?
Yeah.
Where's the feel here? Something that captures our live sound in a recorded format.
I I would certainly be shocked if I
Yeah.
saw if I heard some ambient soundscapes just appearing in the middle of your. It's not the same, but you know, it's about that.
Well,
community.
maybe it's that difficult third album coming up. You know, maybe there's an opportunity.
Yeah,
for some change
it's that Brian Eno produced Soul Motivators record that we're all waiting for. But you want to feel that sense of communion, and I mean, I'm okay with. Again, it depends. Like the project I'm working on now is requiring me to combine a lot of what I've learned from producing organic rock music and not doing, like whenever I do rock music, I don't do a lot of time correction and that type of stuff. I like to leave that raw sound in. But the project I'm working on now is really forcing me to marry the two worlds of, you know, okay, organic real instruments, but also all this electronic stuff and, you combining those two worlds. So it's certainly, it's not like I'm against it. There's definitely lots of contexts where it can happen. But that feel, you got to have that feel.
Do you have any thoughts on the Bon Iver album from 2016?
I'm not familiar with it.
22 a Million. It's called.
I'm not familiar with it. You wanna give me your thoughts?
Yeah, if I don't know how familiar you are with Bon Iver in general. He started off as a kind of alt folk musician, folk rock, singer-songwriter kind of vibe. I don't think that's quite the right description, but that's the closest for now. He did an album in 2016 called 22 a Million, in which he got into electronic stuff and was able to I'm not sure, but he created some setting on Ableton that James Blake was around for when he was in the studio. He got James Blake's take on this, and James Blake was impressed with it and James Blake took it for his own album. But he has reimagined this batch of songs for this album is electronica stuff. There's a lot of vocoder type stuff. This interesting compressing stuff. I don't know if you'll know it if you hear it. I'm not up on the technical sounds, but
I love my electronic music
with Kanye West.
Yeah, I love my electronic music, and I love experimenting with those things. And certainly not having access to my instruments, I've delved more deeply into that world of synthesis and creating things in the laptop. I mean, I love all that stuff.
But Bon Iver's live shows subsequently went back to a more sort of traditional folk rock, alt country format. So all these wildly experimental electronic folk, if you like, on the album were then reinterpreted in a very quite traditional way. And the realization that what he has is some the song structures are actually quite traditional, and then hit the new band of fans that he had gathered as a result of this experimental album came away somewhat disappointed that what they actually went to see was a folk rock show.
That happens, but I'm generally a proponent of. I'm generally a proponent of what he did, not having heard the music, like in terms of not being able to speak from that point of view of knowing the songs. But generally, I wish artists were a little bit more fearless with reinterpreting music for the live show. Like I wish people realized that like a live performance is fundamentally different than a recording. It's the difference like between film and theater, And so I wish.
Yeah. Well, maybe I wonder if he thought he'd done all this experimental stuff in the studio, and then maybe he wanted to go on tour and have a good time.
Well, that's
I don't know
it.
what his thinking was.
Yeah, I say, fuck the fans that don't get it, because, and I mean, even more in terms of the time that we're in. I think the word fan and I think the word star, rock star or star, whatever. Those are concepts that really were prevalent in the time when we were growing up. But I think that even that paradigm is changing, and now I like the terms artist and patron a bit more. Right. And since you know, we can't really, I mean, it's not like people are making loads of money from their recordings and stuff. It's hard times for the music industry. Certainly the business model is still in crisis, on life support. So it's like, you know, like if I'm sitting around making music and I have no belief that I'm going to make any substantial amount of money from these recordings, then like I don't know how much of an obligation I feel towards pleasing people. It is different when you're playing a show and people pay some money to see you play live. Now that being said, I really like the idea that he did all these experimental electronic tunes, and you know, in the live context, reduced it to like acoustic folk. I'm a huge proponent of that. I think that's awesome. If people are paying to go see you perform, you know, you might want to at least figure out a way to give some indication that that's what's going to happen, I suppose, so that people aren't that disappointed, you know, coming away from it. And there's also other ways to reinterpret music as well, right? Like, just because the electronic stuff that you composed on record was too wacky and complicated to recreate live, or whatever reason, you know, that prevents you from recreating it live, doesn't mean that there are other ways to sort of still do those types of things and imagine those types of sounds. And that really interests me. Like, I'm really interested, like, what if I do make a very strange electronic composition? What would happen if I just replaced it all with live instruments? How would I keep the essence of the composition? Those types of questions really interest me, and definitely something I want to explore more. I mean, I haven't performed, you know, really in my adult life. I think I've just played the amount of shows I've played in my adult life, I can probably count on one hand. But if I was to ever sort of perform any of my own music, I would want to think of interesting ways to reimagine it in a live setting that keeps the essence of the composition but makes it engaging, right? Otherwise, like I said, I would just rather see a DJ set.
Yeah, I hear you. It's really interesting. You know, the elements of theatrics. What is theatrical within a live performance? What is too much? What is too gimmicky? I mean, again, you know, the Holy Trinity in the 80s was Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Prince, right? In terms of those big superstars that would put out large theatrical performances and were the last kind of superstar, rock star. And we don't, I mean, I have conversations, you know, my partner asked this question quite a lot. She says, who are the equivalents to Prince, Michael Jackson, Madonna these days? And the landscape has changed so much that it is difficult to find an equivalent. Maybe Beyonce. Certainly in terms of, I went to see, I was at Osheaga last year, and I went to see Childish Gambino.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Live show has the elements of the Michael Jackson, has the video screens, has the theatrical performances, as well as the live band. And he doesn't have the song catalog that Michael Jackson or Prince does, but in terms of a live show, he's very relevant. He's very much on that Beyonce theatrical style of performance as well. And so maybe that speaks to that idea that a live experience can exist within that space of its own. You don't need necessarily this strong body of work. You don't need to put out an album and then sort of take it on tour.
Well, the idea of putting out an album now is also getting more and more, you know, there are artists that just put out singles and EPs. And so there's that. And I mean, you know, I remember when I was a kid, I would be disappointed when, you know, like I grew up listening to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and then I would get some bootleg and be disappointed when the songs weren't exactly like on the record. But you know, that's an attitude I had when I was a kid. Now I kind of want to see the things reimagined, you know, live, and I'm really looking for that energy and communion. Especially if it's a band. If it's a band, then I want to see the communion of those band members on stage. I want to see something that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's a little bit different again with a solo artist, right? Like that's another thing. So some solo artists put together bands that recreate that intimacy and that sense of communion. Then there are other solo artists that it's very much like, here's the artist, here's a bunch of musicians that are my hired musicians, and they're behind me. That's another thing that exists and can work. But the theatrics is also interesting, you know, like you have these big shows with big, you know, spectacles, but then like, you know, we all like to go see a band in a small club without all that crazy stuff, right? We like that intimacy. I prefer a small club show over those big theatrical things any day. And yeah, I mean, I don't have anything to add to that. That's just how I feel.
Well, that's interesting how that's going to look if and when we're able to get back to some kind of semi-normal with going to see a live show. They had an article in Now magazine last week, and it's they were talking to the owner of a guy that owns the Garrison and the Baby G here on Dundas West, and two of my favorite venues. He talked about for the Garrison being able to social distance, being able to create an environment that's as safe as possible for patrons and artists. There you go. Mm-hmm. He said they would have to their maximum capacity, I think, could be something like 35 people with sort of plexiglass dividers in the audience, and then
ouch,
a huge plexiglass screen at the front of the stage with band members socially distancing behind them. Now,
brutal. That's
for
brutal.
A 9-piece band like the Soul Motivators, that's just not doable. And as my friend pointed out, how are you all going to gather in those tiny dressing rooms as well? Yeah. So the owner of these venues just envisaged this post-apocalyptic sterile environment where people are sitting within these plexiglass booths, standing stock still.
Before that happens, everyone's going to get their own plexiglass cube and just be walking around outside in a bubble. I mean, like, this thing, it might take a while, but things will either get back to normal or the world will end. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see a scenario like I don't see a scenario where things won't get back to normal, at least at the level of like music venues and socializing, unless the world comes to an end. You know, like it might take some time, but this COVID thing will run its course. I feel there's a lot of uncertainty with regards to, I mean, you know me, I like to keep up on the news and global events. And one of the really interesting things about COVID is just the amount of incoherence from experts and authorities that we've experienced. Like I've spoken about this before, how with normal issues, global issues, political issues, social issues, we're usually talking about things with consequences that are kind of like down the line. And so people make a lot of overconfident speculations. You know, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. No, it's going to unfold according to my ideology or not according to your ideology. And people say all kinds of stupid things and make stupid predictions. And people kind of, the public who are forced to listen to these commentators kind of have to kind of nod along and choose who to agree with. And the people that have the quote unquote authority to tell us these things get away with making horrible predictions and leading us astray. The interesting thing about COVID is that like it's one of these things that in real time it's the incompetence of authorities and experts is being laid to bear. And I want to be careful. I'm not anti-expert, because there's a negative aspect of being sort of, you know, rabidly anti-expert. And we've seen the consequences of that over the last half a decade. But, you know, the incoherent set of instructions that we've been getting from all types of authorities, whether it's the WHO with the whole confusion around whether you should wear masks or you shouldn't, that was just a travesty. And then, you know, you see governments flailing around just trying to manage this this crisis. You see different governments reacting differently with different outcomes. You see, and then you see things that you should want to trust, like the World Health Organization, just blatantly kind of happy to obfuscate information if they happen to be talking to a Chinese official, like very strange things. And that, you know, it really, it undermines your faith in a lot in the system. And we were already existed in a world pre-COVID where things were quite uncertain. We really don't know which direction the world is headed. And that's kind of why I say, like, we're going to get the COVID thing, we're going to get over it. It might take a little bit longer, more or less, than we were expecting, but there's a higher probability of civilizational collapse than COVID just being like this thing that's going to be like, we're not just going to be in bubbles and social distancing for the distant future. Like, either society will collapse and there's going to be a whole new order that's going to be quite alarming for everybody, or we're going to get over this, you know, like within a year, you know, not much longer than that. I don't think.
I hope it's, I hope we get over it or get through it, however you want to look at it. And on the other side is a new normal that we perhaps can't imagine just yet. I mean, the outline, at least for live music, is kind of crude and not very appealing. But then, of course, original iterations of worlds that don't exist yet are going to be crude, are going to be inadequate.
There will be a new normal.
Unappealing.
There will be a new normal, and there will certainly be a new normal around work, because so many people have discovered that you can work from home. I was reading a headline. I didn't get to dig into the article, but about how, you know, working from home will become a norm, but you're gonna have to say goodbye to the 5-day work week, because now, if like I know this as a freelancer, that like the moment you start working from home, you're just available to work at any time, right? And some of my smarter friends who are in the same line of work actually create a weekend for themselves. Like, they make sure they take a weekend and they don't do work on the weekend. But so I think you'll see that happen, and it was already happening, you know, with smartphones. You know, like people in even regular office jobs, they're always reachable. So we're going to see a little bit of a reimagining with the work. I think I can't make any predictions. There's so many positive and negative predictions you can make. Certainly, we've seen a rise in weird actions coming from states with, you know, like encroachment on people's rights. That's going to be more of an issue in some parts of the world than others. Certainly, the part of the world that I'm in right now, I'm not looking forward to the types of things that. I mean, the government has already overreached so much in the middle of this pandemic, and there's other countries, like Hungary's democracy was dissolved, I believe, in the midst of this crisis. There's all kinds of weird things going on in America. But I mean, you know, that brings me around. I saw
the Polish elections as well.
Yeah, no, and lots of places.
Absolutely
lots of places.
The footage from that was everyone in a big arena. No one wearing masks, and I just thought, is this some stock footage from the before times?
Yeah.
Don't know.
Well, I mean, look at America. They don't give a fuck either over there. Who knows how that's going to play out? And you, on top of that, you have all the social unrest grafted on top of that, and an election. Makes things very unpredictable, very fluid. So that's all worrying stuff. But that kind of leads me to kind of inquire what the situation is like in Toronto right now. I mean, well, how is the COVID situation over there? How's the lockdown situation? Are things opening up? What's going on?
Well, I'm particularly diligent personally. I'm always leaving the house with a mask on. They're looking at moving to stage 3 of reopening shortly. It's been delayed for Toronto, but I think some other parts of Ontario are looking to move to that stage, which will mean things like gyms can open at a reduced capacity, and surely that's one of the worst ideas ever with people breathing heavily and working out like that. I don't know how that's going to work. I've been out to a couple of patios, and very cautious about that becoming the norm for me at this stage. Because there are people carousing as they do, and carrying on as normal. There's not a lot of social distancing going on there. Also, they've taken to setting up patios on the pavement, so you're just a few feet from traffic coming by.
Interesting.
And that seems a little disconcerting. Yeah. You're just they put up.
I don't know what to make of that.
So I'm taking it one day at a time. Of course, I'm in a very privileged position. I have work. My work continues. My other work continues. I'm in a good apartment. So
is it the same one, same apartment I would have known from 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago when I was over there?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's a good spot.
It's a nice spot. Very nice neighborhood. Yeah, I'm probably not the person to comment in too much detail, and I'm certainly going to give a much more positive, maybe even slightly glib perspective on where we're going on things. I'm aware of that. I know for me, this time has sort of been quite necessary. I've enabled me to become more introspective. I mean, my project in the last sort of 5 years or so has been to be a better man, better brother, better friend, better son, bandmate, all those kinds of things. So they're slightly more abstract in terms of projects I do to achieve that, but allowing to be aware of your energy, aware of your nervous energy around people, and reflect and look at ways of just meditating, just being, just breathing. This time has been perfect for that kind of thing. So I'm taking those opportunities.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that anyway, because between the two of us, your self-care game has always been better than mine. Mine has improved a bit over the last few years, certainly after I've started doing yoga. I've started doing yoga after the last time I saw you in person. So that's had a huge effect on my life. And it was something that I wanted to, before I ask the question, I want people out there in the world to know that when I was living in Toronto, my place in Toronto is it's right by a subway station, but it is, for those of you who know Toronto, it is basically one subway station away from Scarborough. So like Scarborough's like the other side of the street. And it is for people who live in the city of Toronto, a lot of hipstery type people that might be my friends in the music scene, those kind of folks, they will not travel to my home to visit me. And I lived there for like 7 years, and like so many of my friends would just not be willing to get on the subway for 20 minutes sometimes just to come visit me. You, however, in some of my darkest times, not only would come to my house, there have been instances where you've come to my house with a basket full of ingredients, and you have prepared me some excellent meals. And so you're an amazing chef, and you're an amazing chef, and you also are a very conscientious and large-hearted friend that would do such a thing. I mean, it's already a huge deal if you have a friend that's coming over to your house with ingredients and cooking food for you because you don't know what the hell you're doing. Well, and you, by you I mean me, of course. I'm speaking in a strange third, second person, Lord only knows. But anyway, so you're a great chef, and you've always your self-care game has always been good, and it's steadily improved in the time I've known you. But another thing, you correct me if I'm wrong, but a few years back, I remember I was sitting with you at your place, and Am I wrong in saying that your diet has sort of just naturally leaned more towards vegetarianism? Like you didn't kind of try, it just went in that direction?
Maybe about 10 years ago, I started being more diligent with that. I was a complete vegetarian for a couple of years. Now we don't have meat in the house, but when I'm out and there's something good on the menu or round at someone's place, I'll have some of the meat. I'm very vegetarian friendly. I think that's probably the best way to put it.
The reason why I bring that up particularly is because I'm really fascinated by and also a really big proponent of sort of vegetarianism by accident. You know, because like, you know, in the time that we have come of age as we have been adults, you know, there has been a trend in the Western world to adopt vegetarianism and even veganism. But a lot of people sort of go at it from the point of view of, okay, like starting tomorrow, I'm a vegetarian and I'm not allowed to have meat, and like I'm doing this and it's really hard, and you watch them suffer through it, and then you watch them fail, and then you watch them go back into eating meat and then a junk food because they feel like, you know, like that whole process that people go through, right? Like I'm doing this, I'm vegetarian starting now, and then invariably they fuck it up, and that's a thing I've witnessed pretty often. But I've also witnessed this thing that you have gone through, which is just kind of like, I mean, you say that you tried to be diligent, but what I've noticed is that you've never been strict. Like you've never said, hey, I'm a vegetarian, but you just have managed to very gracefully reduce the amount of meat in your life to the point where now you're saying like, hey, there's no meat in the house, but like, yeah, if there's something cool on the menu or if I'm offered something tasty, I'll have it. And this attitude is something that I would love to be promoted more. I would love more people to know that this is just a totally viable option. Like you can just, like it's not this serious, strict thing that you have to stick to. And I experienced something similar in my life. After I started doing yoga, I found that my body, after, you know, a period of about 6 months, my body was just naturally gravitating towards more vegetarian food. And it's not like I cut out meat. I still eat meat, but I have less of an appetite for it. I still enjoy it. And also the meat has to be prepared at a better level. Like I can't just handle like random junk, you know, fast food type meat. Like if I'm having meat, it needs to be prepared well and cooked in a healthy way. And it just sort of happened on its own. And the more you lean into it, the more your body cooperates with you and helps you just naturally helps you select the foods that you that are going to be nutritious for you. And I've spoken about this before on my podcast. So I mean, that's interesting. Did you have a similar experience? I mean, how?
I think I knew I wanted to be healthier. I think the approach I took, you know, I'm partial to a pint or two, as you know, and I think I was looking at ways, erroneously it seems, of offsetting those bad habits with more diligence in other areas, healthy eating, and of course, you
still go for a pint or two though.
Yes, I do.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, if the next time I'm in Toronto, if we're not going for a pint or two, that would be sad. I mean, there's lots of other activities we can engage in. There'll be something amiss. A pint should be on the table at some point. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I think I mean, that's the wrong approach to it. And I think you and I both know enough now that the key is to eat healthily. You shouldn't rule anything out as long as it's well prepared, or even if it's not well prepared, you shouldn't have too much of that. And,
you can cheat from time to time, but generally, yeah, you know, well prepared is the
cheating from time to time, and that's the key. This absolutism is not a good way to go. Also, to call myself a vegetarian, it would have been incorrect even at that time, because I think I was more interested in the idea of that identity more than anything else. It was certainly a time when I was searching.
For some people, it becomes an identity. And that's kind of why they fail, right? Like let's say you slip up, and then all of a sudden you've like violated your own sense of identity, and then you're just like, well, fuck this.
Yeah.
Whereas like when it comes from a place of like, I just want to be healthier,
there's that feeling of failure.
You know, I just wanted to be healthier. Then it's not a huge deal if you slip up. It's like fine.
Yeah, I think it's you know, I'm happy that I came across in those earlier years as someone who, in some respects, had his game together. In terms of coming out to visit and bringing food and sharing those good things, because I think really I didn't feel for about 5 years I felt unsettled, completely unsettled, huge feelings of anxiety, to the point it was ruining relationships, romantic relationships, not having my game together, perhaps where I needed it most, which was the inner core. So I looked for external elements and labels to help me feel centered and help me feel that I had an identity. I think as that's changed, and I've done a lot of work on that, and been in therapy now for close to 6 or 7 years continuously, realizing that that so many of these things don't matter. You don't have to restrict yourself. If you're restricting yourselves in certain things, what are you not attending to by focusing all your efforts on this vegetarianism, for example? What are you not focusing on and that you need to work through? And is this going to be a quick fix to other things? So it's psychological, more than anything.
And I mean, it should be said that for some people, the absolutism works. Like there are certain personality types for which it actually does work. Like, okay, I'm just starting tomorrow, I'm not eating dairy, and it works. But for a huge amount of people, it's just like, it's just better if you don't take it that seriously. If you just say, I'm trying to cut down on meat, or I'm trying to eliminate dairy, or whatever it is, and you're not so rigid about it, you kind of increase your probability for success, and you also increase your probability from getting those health benefits, right? Because like you start off with this identity label, and you want it, and you fail and you fall off, and then you don't do it, and then you don't get the health benefit. Whereas like if you give yourself that little bit of grace and you just keep going, or if you have the right idea, you're not even giving yourself grace. It's just like, okay, I had a piece of chicken the other day, right? And then you actually end up getting the health benefits because the larger dietary habit sort of is in place, And I think that's so. You mentioned you were doing some meditation. Did I catch that correctly?
I get, in a sense, yes. But very, very basic stuff. Just calming my mind when I need to. I think what ultimately works for me is running or walking, and the approach to any kind of discipline and building on that discipline is exercise. Is not how many reps can I do, not am I building the number of laps that I'm doing around a park, and not this idea of quantifying it in such a way. It's about going out and, well, did I sweat today? Do I feel good? Do I get the heart rate up? And balancing that alongside, I mean, I think we can the best things we can do for ourselves is fundamentally it's exercise, not eating late, not eating too much at all, particularly if we're in sedentary work, avoiding nicotine, alcohol, caffeine, that kind of thing. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but if we
nicotine, I would love to get rid of. Coffee is like I'm in the coffee game for life, as far as I'm concerned. Coffee is like coffee has been there for me through pretty difficult times. Like, God, that's become a part of my identity. There you go. So that's if I identify with any dietary thing, it's the coffee. The nicotine has to go, and I have not been in Canada since the legalization of pot has occurred. In India, the pot that we get is such that you kind of have to mix tobacco in it to get it to burn properly. I mean, it's really, you can kind of like roll a joint without. And I mean, you know me, I'm a huge pothead, and it's still a thing. I go through some phases where I manage to avoid smoking, and I'm thankfully I'm in one of those phases right now. But the nature of the pot that we get over here, you kind of have to mix tobacco, and then once you, that's a big part of the reason why I have a problem with it, because once you mix that tobacco, then you get hooked from that tobacco, and then you're just smoking like an obscene amount of pot in a day, and maybe that is not ideal. So eliminating the nicotine for sure. It's such a pesky type of habit, and so difficult to quit, and can so easily creep back into your life, especially if you're getting it from these weird sort of sources that are maybe 1 degree removed from, you know, having a pack of smokes or whatever. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You know what alcohol is one of these things where it's like if you do it in moderation, it can be kind of healthy. Is that still the consensus there with that? I don't know.
I don't think so. I think that's nonsense.
No, not even like a glass of wine in the evening is not.
Well, I think that's fine. It's considerably less harmful than, you know, a couple of bottles of wine a night.
Yeah. Your home culture in England. I mean, people are. In Britain generally, is you guys are famous for just going hard, and I definitely miss my time in Scotland. That style of drinking, I really do miss it.
Well, yeah, I don't know whether it's that good. I
like
thought of you know, we had access to alcohol from such a young age because it's a relaxed part of the culture, and I was actually impressed when I came here that at least in the LCBO, the bottle shop here, there is a bit more of a stricter approach in terms of providing ID and that kind of stuff. I was impressed to see that. I thought that would at least doing more on an official level to stop kids getting hold of alcohol, but. You know,
my drinking went way down when I moved to Toronto. I mean, I moved to Toronto coming from Newfoundland, and straight after living, you know, a year and a half in Scotland, and I was not prepared for the type of drinking culture in Toronto. And I mean, you'll probably remember from my early years. There was 2 years in a row where my New Year's resolution was to drink more, because I kind of like missed my memories of drinking from when I lived in Britain and even Newfoundland.
Yeah, it's good to have a plan, isn't it? Good to have a plan like that. Cutting up.
I really need to drink more this year. But you know, for COVID, all the liquor shops have been closed here in Bombay. I think you can get liquor delivered, and I've been considering it. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. What else have you been doing to sort of keep yourself occupied during these weird times?
I'm doing a hike next week. I'm hiking the Bruce Trail in the Niagara region, and again, I had these ambitions of doing like 2 or 3 days of solid hiking, but finding that I'm approaching 40 now, and I'm starting to slow down just a touch. I actually walked from my place here in the Junction out to Vic Park on Thursday evening.
Vic Park?
And yeah.
Shit, dude, so that's like me. That's like me when I was in Toronto. I used to walk these like outlandish distances.
Yeah, you did.
Like on a regular basis. And since I moved to Bombay, my leg health has decreased dramatically, because Bombay is not a very walking friendly city for the most part. But I miss my long ass walks. You know, it's impressive. I think it's making me wish I was back there.
Moving. Like I say, do an exercise for the feeling you want rather than the analytical reps you've done. That was quite fun, and you can quantify it by measuring it by sort of subway stops. I walked the subway line from
Yeah.
Runnymede.
I like that. I like that much better as a unit.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm doing that. So next weekend I'm starting at Niagara Falls, and I'm walking. It's probably going to end up around about St. Catharines area. I'd had this plan to walk from Niagara Falls to Grimsby, but it's about 75 kilometers. And I know that in 3 hours I can walk about 16, 17 kilometers. But you do end up getting quite tired after that, or I do certainly. So
Dude, we got to do this when I get back to Ontario. We got to go on these long walks. Let's make it happen.
We'll do it. And also, you know, the ego, putting the intention out that you're going to walk from Niagara Falls to Grimsby and go, okay, there we go. Got it.
Yeah, we're going to do it.
75 kilometers. Okay, that sounds a bit much. That sounds a bit crazy. But not...
Ease it back.
And then realizing when you're doing a couple of test walks, that's a completely ludicrous proposal. Using this as information for your health, not beating yourself up because you couldn't rise to the challenge. It's it was a great moment to take this information and modify. So that's what I'm doing next weekend. Other than that, I'm going out jogging most days. It's quite a simple life, in fact, for me. And as I say, completely necessary. So I'm just enjoying it.
That's a beautiful thing. That's what we want.
Doing the work to keep things sort of ticking along in just the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm looking for that simple life.
Keep that in the balance.
My life is weirdly complex, like split between two countries, and I'm looking. I've been really lucky. I've mostly got what I signed up for, in terms of an interesting life filled with all kinds of cool stuff, very rich with experience. But I'm definitely craving that simplicity, and I've been trying to sort of. I mean, the way that my life is now, it seems like I'm in for more of this sort of nomadic stuff. Not fully nomadic, but my mom lives in Calcutta. She's quite elderly. Like I'm gonna have to retain the freedom to sort of just hop on a plane, pandemic notwithstanding. When certain emergencies occur, I gotta travel. And so that's gonna probably continue to be the case. And I'm lucky that I've cultivated some work that I can do from anywhere.
Yeah.
But accepting that those are the parameters I'm working, or those are my constraints, I'm trying to cultivate certain regular habits that will keep me grounded even in the middle of that chaos. And certainly all of these things, like exercise, but not exercise for the sake of analysis, but for the sake of just making you feel better and making you feel more in tune with your body, eating properly. And it's amazing how eating properly, and especially cutting out certain synthetic foods in particular, allows you can feel your body communicate with you so much better when you cut out those synthetic things. Have you noticed this? Or, I mean, you've been eating quite well for a long time. I don't know where you're at in terms of cutting out junk food, but when I go through, when I get on long stretches of cutting out, especially refined sugars and certainly junk food, I can feel the effect of food in my body pretty quickly, and my cravings start to get a lot more sensible. Like if you're craving sweetness, it's really your body's way of telling you you need to have fruits, or like that. Your cravings are actually meant to be a system that guides you towards the right type of nutrition. But like a lot of the synthetic foods that we have sort of mess up that internal system that we have that sort of naturally guides us to what we should be eating. Do you find that? Like, are you just so used to it?
Only on a meal-to-meal basis in the short term. I think I haven't particularly felt the benefits of any kind of discipline, because I simply haven't done it for that long. I'll eat less for dinner if I'm not feeling so good, or have a light breakfast, all those kinds of things. So it'll sort of go with the feeling on the moment. I'm curious and admire people who are able to do those things for a prolonged period of times, and start to feel the benefits, start to feel the change, and get through to the other side, that they're able to rewire rewire the body a little bit. I've just growing up in a food culture in my house as a kid, where the 3 meals a day was so important, and food was sort of piled on in a big way.
Yeah.
I've not been able to shake that. I've had, periods of fasting for maybe 12 hours and going and touching on something in just the smallest way and going, oh, okay, what an interesting feeling. The lightness more than anything else, or the reduced headache, or the reduced feeling of full. But I've not been able to do anything beyond that. But I know that these are the kinds of moves I need to make for
you kind
periods of time.
You kind of approach it, and you can kind of get a sense of it. I kind of have that with meditation, where like the yoga class that I had been attending, is a very good instructor, and there's the meditation at the end of the class, and it took a long time, but slowly I was just approaching that sort of mindful state that is talked about. You can kind of get a taste of it for a second, and I sense that you're communicating something similar about fasting or diet, where just for a moment you can kind of, oh yeah, okay, I get this. I see what I get this sensation. I see what's going on. Yeah.
Another big one is breathing. Right. I constantly find myself breathing in a very shallow way, and constantly have to stop myself and learn to regulate it a little bit. So that's why I say meditation in its most sort of basic form, trying to focus on the breath a bit better. So again, I'm only touching on the tiniest things, but just realizing that my breathing is so shallow. There's a reason for the aches that I feel in my shoulders, and the heaviness of the head in some cases. So just trying to get better at that as well.
Have you ever heard of pranayama?
That name sounds familiar.
Well, it's related to yoga.
It's a practice, isn't it?
It is a breathing practice, and there's all these different types of breathing sort of patterns that you can kind of engage in that are quite beneficial. It sounds like, to a more skeptical ear, it sounds like a bunch of woo, but it's not. If you just realize how fundamental breathing is to your existence, it shouldn't be super surprising that sort of modulating it in a thoughtful way, in a disciplined way. And also, I've heard people talk about how, you can measure your life in terms of breaths or heartbeats, right? So like if you slow down your natural breath rate, that's sort of a key to healthy body, a clear mind, and also longevity, right? Like I noticed that my resting breath rate is pretty slow. I was dating somebody about a little bit over a year ago, and when we were sleeping together, I noticed that her breath rate was just so much faster than mine. I was like, wow, like whose situation is normal? Is your situation the norm, or is mine? But I think, again, that's sort of a result of yoga. Like when I first started yoga, again, like I'm an on and off smoker. So I found that the breathing that was required to do the yoga, like I couldn't take like a continuous deep breath that would always stop and start in the middle. And then within a few weeks of doing yoga, like my breath just got smoother and smoother. And now, my yoga instructor has this great thing that he says, especially if there's somebody new in the class, he'll walk by and say, if you breathe through your mouth, you die faster. And he says it in that really calm voice. Like, if you breathe through your mouth, you'll die faster. And then if it's somebody that's in the class that, has been in the class, right? He's like, Arnab, what happens when you breathe through your mouth? Like, you die faster. That's right. Shout out, Pradesh.
You die faster.
Yeah,
you die faster.
Yeah, it's a great line. But yeah, breath is super important, man. It is such a fundamental part of what we are,
I mean, yes, a couple of other things. Reduced social media in a big way.
Oh, yeah,
reduced that intake. Yeah. We've talked about that before. I mean, and that's evident to a lot of people. Also, I'm interested in this idea of honoring my 7-year-old self. As a kid, what were the things that I really enjoyed, and what are those elemental components of my early life, my early childhood? What am I able to bring through to adulthood in a way that is, you know, somewhat mature and somewhat responsible? And I keep going back to these things. I like to spend a lot of time on my own. I like to do this walking. I like to do this jogging. I like to run. I like to engage with music in different ways, whether I'm composing it, whether I'm listening to it. And the great thing is to be able to, or a year or so ago, to be going to live shows and enjoying the music for music's sake, and not having the analytical ear and the
that's calmed down for me too.
And the desire, and being able to have a great moment. Yeah,
we've had this conversation, you know, where you, like, as musicians, as composers, you know, you go to see a show and you're analyzing it, and you might even make you feel kind of cool about yourself for a minute that we have a certain insight into a performance or something. But now I feel like I've graduated past that and come full circle to just trying to, you know, experience music at an, you know, ethereal level.
Yes.
Ethereal maybe is the wrong word. I don't know. I'll have to look it up later.
No, that's a good word. I like it.
Could be. But
spiritual, ethereal, or visceral if it's funk.
Visceral, you know,
is better.
You're visceral is better
within your body.
Yeah. I remember early, before I started playing guitar, I when I was a kid in junior high, and I would listening to the band Pearl Jam. I remember the album 10 because it's an album that is in my consciousness from way before I ever picked up a guitar or knew anything about music production or mixing. And and there were no keyboards on that record. So, you know, the one instrument that I could play, the piano at that time, wasn't present on the album. So you would listen to this sound coming from your speaker, and I couldn't really distinguish what the guitar was, what the bass was. You just heard this sound in its completeness and its entirety. And then, you know, there's this like process that took like a half a lifetime of learning, you know, learning how to play the guitar, learning how to play the bass, learning how to play the drums, learning about different types of guitars and what a Stratocaster sounds like and what a Les Paul sounds like, and how to mix things, and you go through that whole process, and very analytical of songwriting. What does this mean? The culture of grunge music. What Pearl Jam means in the context of grunge music. That whole fucking thing. And then now finally I've like arrived at this place where I can turn it on, and I'm back at being able to listen to it as this whole complete thing rather than analyzing its parts. It's like exactly where I was at when I was a kid, except just more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Like I had to go through this whole in-between phase of weird complexity and looking at small details and parts. And I can look at the whole now again, or experience the whole, listen to it, whatever, and go back to that feeling of just taking it all in as one thing. But that knowledge that I have now that I've acquired from doing all these things is there, and I can, like, it's not exactly analysis. Now it's like I feel the analysis instead of thinking through the analysis.
Yes.
Now the analysis is just felt, and so it's like that experience as a kid, just with an extra like sophistication. One of my favorite books, that 101 Things I Learned in Architecture School. It's that book that I give anybody that has any questions about music production. It's like, do you know any good books for music production? I always just say 101 Things I Learned in Architecture School. And they have one of my favorite pages in that talks about simplicity and then complexity, simplicity and then complicatedness, and then sort of informed simplicity. And so it starts off, the first diagram is just like three rooms, you know, overhead, like cross section, 3 rooms, and it's simple. And then the next slide is, you know, 16 rooms, all individually placed and connected in this really overly complicated manner. And then the last image is this informed simplicity, where it's like 16 rooms, but it's done through this really elegant intersection of just 3 cubes. Right. And I'm getting the numbers wrong, like 3, 16, forget that. But just the idea of taking this very, very, very complicated thing and really realizing the same thing. You're still getting the same number of rooms, but now it's been performed through just the least amount of moves, just 3 strokes, and you have the diagram of all the rooms. Gotcha. And it just coming through that whole process. One of my favorite pages in one of my most favorite books. But yeah, I don't know how well the analogy translates, but I get that feeling now when I listen to music where I can just kind of,
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
In the sense that when I learnt a few years ago to do a funky clavinet sound in the Stevie Wonder style, and then adding phaser onto it and stuff like that, and being able to replicate that sound that so enthralled me as a kid, Stevie Wonder making these sounds that sounded like nothing else I'd ever heard. Because it's not only the sound, it's the phaser, it's the dexterity of the fingers playing in a very rhythmic fashion. Being able to realize that is a great thing, and then hitting on that sound, and then just sit in that groove with that.
Yep.
Don't try and change too much. You have the components, you have the elements. Repeat. Get the feeling of it. That was a huge thing. So that's an example of dialing things back to that wonder you had as a 7-year-old, the simplicity with the experience that you've put in place since then.
Goes back to feel at the end.
Another thing I did, just been doing at home, we've not been able to get together as a band, but I've been doing little songs on just GarageBand and sending them to friends and family, very targeted audience, and just ridiculous songs about when we were kids, sending something to my sister and a couple of friends from back home, and replicating them in a 90s hip hop style or a sort of late 80s pop house rap kind of sound, and being able to just doing it for fun and knowing that I'm going to get immediate reaction from these people that I have in mind when I put it together. That's been very satisfying. Music for music's sake, and not on a big level and expecting to reach thousands of people, who are however many it is. You're just it's the sharing of music, the gift of music from one person to another.
Yeah, well, that's a form of tinkering, and it's important to do it. Like, no matter how good you get, no matter how successful or out there you get with your big projects, your main projects, the ones that you're known for, it's always important to maintain that process of tinkering and doing these little mini projects and things like that. And I mean, that's something I really discovered after moving over here. After moving over here was a big existential crisis, right? Like, I've left all of my gear in Toronto. I don't know anybody here. What do I do? Do I even keep making music? And just the music for the sake of music, even if it's like a minute long, a minute and a half, just for the sake of doing, that had a really big impact on me and helped me a lot in my creativity. And I've learned so much because I engage in those little mini acts of creativity. And, my most recent release, I mean, it's my first solo release, right? Like, I've produced all these records for other people. Recently I released my first, like, kind of full length-ish solo project. And it is, I don't call it an album. I call it a beat tape. But all the tracks on that were made in that way, where it's just like, I'm just gonna brute force, just like make a track. Like, I'm gonna sit down and just make a track as quickly as I can, just for the sake of it. And when I got enough of those that kind of sounded like they were in a similar vibe, all of a sudden I have a project that's done. So that tinkering can be very fruitful in many different ways. You never know, right? And so it's something that I encourage everybody to do in whatever medium that they are expressing themselves in, whether it's visual arts or music or whatever the case may be. Those little bursts of creativity, they really help with even the longer projects.
It's interesting as well to take yourself out of the mindset of a musician with all the skills that you've learned over the years and go, what's going to be fun? What's going to be good? What's going to hit those emotional points for the crowd? Or in my case, in recent months, sending out little songs to friends and family. Yeah. And I think I'd much rather look up and see people dancing and smiling rather than, you know, a few guys at the back stroking their chins. I think it's much more satisfying to me to have people losing their minds on the dance floor.
Well, the Soul Motivators are really great for that, and I want to express to anybody who's listening out there just what a force of nature it is to see the Soul Motivators perform. And if anybody has the opportunity to go see you guys live, it's really an amazing show. And I mean, we've been speaking for well over 2 hours. So before we wrap it up, like what are the releases? I mean, you guys released something this year, which was pretty recent. Am I correct? Did I see something on Instagram that says you guys are streaming something today?
Yes, today. We're part of the Beaches Jazz Fest.
Yeah, okay. So like, oh, that's interesting. So the Beaches Jazz Fest, I've seen you guys perform at the actual non-pandemic version of the Beaches Jazz Fest. And God, the beaches, what a lovely area. I miss strolling through that area of Toronto. But obviously, I'm not going to have this podcast edited and released by tonight, Toronto time. So those of you with Time Machine access, please do go back to the 26th of July and stream this event. But so what's the name of your most recent record that you guys released? The
most recent album is called Do the Damn Thing.
Nice. That's a great
title. By the Soul
title.
Motivators. Yeah. On Do Right Music. If you go to our YouTube page, you'll see a whole host of clips on there. So we encourage people to check that out. There's lots of great live material there. Our most recent live recording was live at Lee's Palace in February of this year. Check it out.
Lee's Palace, a legendary venue as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So get on there, get funky, let yourself be motivated.
Well, that's really a great way to close, so I don't want to drag it on too much longer than that. I've got to prepare something for myself to eat as well. James, it's been great talking to you, and I can't wait to see you again soon in person for a few pints or a healthy meal or any other type of thing for a long walk from Niagara to St. Catharines or whatever the case may be.
It's been a while, and you know, it's testament to our friendship that we can drop in like this and speak for 2.5 hours like it ain't no thing, like we've never been away. So whenever we speak again, my friend, hopefully sooner rather than later, I look forward to it.
Yeah, man. Take care of yourself. Have a good one.
You too. Love you, brother. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.